protests. Everybody's protesting from Michigan to my home state of California. This is Dennis Wisco of Wisco Weekly. Thanks for tuning in. On this particular episode or this particular video, I want to share with you a clip of a podcast recording I did with Stephen Shu from Umlaut. One of the biggest topics right now is reopening the economy. And a lot of the experts and pundits and mainstream media looking at it more from the side of how are we going to bring back or phase in the economy, especially balancing that against especially balancing it against public safety, right? So then there's the idea of essential versus non-essential businesses. There's the idea of ensuring that people are being tested as they're going to work. There's the idea of ensuring that everything is being disinfected. One particular area that's not being talked about, and I'm glad that I'm able to bring this to you, is when the economy starts to reopen and as businesses begin to hire back employees, as they begin their marketing efforts, you want to start to look at location data. Location data is extremely important these days because you can start to see the flow of traffic into particular regions, and then you can kind of gauge how fast you need to scale your operation. So this is exactly what I will show you here in a second, the clip from the podcast episode. And by the way, if you want to hear the full episode of this, you can see the link in the description below, but you can go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, search Wisco Weekly. You can say, Alexa, play Wisco Weekly podcast, and you can hear the full episode, and you can see not only location data, but also what are the most popular apps people are using pre-stay-at-home orders and till this day, okay? This is a lot of great information that will be useful to you, especially for small business owners as they start to ramp up their operation when the economy reopens. So stay tuned. That's what you're going to hear about right now.
Yeah, I think this is what I mentioned, that the total distance moved in kilometers per day, by our users. You can see the dark blue or the purple one, it's actually the movement, the number of users that have the movement less than 1 kilometer. 1 kilometer is, I think that's close to less than 0.7 miles, if my math is right. Yeah. And then we actually label the stay-home order. You can see that across different cities, and that people are actually react differently. For both Detroit and Seattle, you see actually there's a drop in terms of the total number of users who travel long distance. After the stay-home order, for Greenville, South Carolina, one of the few states that there's no stay-home order at the statewide, you see there's actually not so much change on people's behavior there. Then when we see several other cities, Los Angeles.
Now, Stephen, just so we're clear here, as we're looking at this graph, we're seeing some trends, and that is in the yellow. And first off, this data is being tracked since the about mid-January up until when was this one? Beginning of March?
Yeah, well, end of March, I think.
End of March, yeah. Sorry, end of March. So beginning of January, end of March. And what we're seeing here is that there are travel distances that were always floating around, or mostly floating around January and February, in more than 15,000 miles or 15,000 kilometers. And once the stay-at-home orders were put in place in different states, then you can start to see that a lot of folks were not traveling outside 15 kilometers. They were, most of them now, you can say that more than 50% were going under 2.5 kilometers now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's the kind of overall trend that we're seeing here.
Exactly. And you see that more significant in New York, right? The charts looks the same, but as I mentioned, the farthest travel distance in kilometer per day. That's what we call it, a travel radius, right? This actually shows even more, right? People will travel to closer distance, closer point than they used to after the COVID-19. Now you can see the clear stay-home order have the impact on that. Detroit, Seattle, Greenville, again, there's no stay-at-home order, so not so much changed. Another part, and I'm showing here, we call it heat map of the user density. The red color means more users, and the green color means fewer users. So you can see this is what we took the snapshot of mid-February when everything seems still normal. It's a normal day. There's no lockdown orders compared to March 31st. I think in Detroit by that time it's approaching the peak of all the new cases. You can see there's quite a significant change in terms of how many people are still on the street, right? There's almost no, I would say, red or even yellow dots outside the highways, but on the highway you can see definitely fewer, less traffic, right, across on the major roads. That's quite significant. Seattle, it's not that significant, but service spot that you can see. And then I like to change maybe that to New York, because that's epic center of everything. You can say it's quite obvious that the user density have significantly reduced post the COVID-19.
Now this is this heat map that we're seeing of New York, while the density has been reduced, this is taking into account people or cars or both?
Those are people, because we track phones, right? Okay. So obviously, if we label that at probably several major highways or roads, then people are using their phones where they're driving, probably navigation, right? So you see those major roads, there's a lot of cars, and people driving essentially. So essentially, at the end of the day, we're tracking phones. Yeah. Then with the speed information, we can tell that the people driving or not. LA, several hotspots, and you can see it disappeared. After the lockdown issued, there's almost very few high density area outside the highway.
So Stephen, so some of this information, right? It's not exactly earth shattering, right? We know that after the stay at home orders, that a lot of people were working from home, so that decreased the amount of their distance traveled. We know that as a result of people working at home, that they're doing things more now on Wi-Fi or on 5G. What can we conclude out of this location data that can help us understand maybe how to reopen the economy, the U.S. economy?
Very good question. Because so what you're seeing here is more of a, I would say, macro view. What we can do is we can zoom in to a certain area. For example, a lot of the business got impacted here, right? The retail shops are closed, like car dealerships, they're closed, right? How would we know that when to open those retail shops, or how can the business prepare for the time when it comes? So if we zoom in and start monitoring a specific, I would say, point of interests, like the shopping malls, like the dealership, we can see how the number of visits that people actually visit the location changed over the time of this period. And we have a global pandemic, right? And then the latest news I heard is that Germany start opening up car dealerships, and they start opening up their economy like shopping malls, but people need to wear masks. Now we can start tracking, because our data is global. We can use the information we have globally to give an indication on, let's say, our US customers, to say, hey, after the government lifted the stay-home order, how fast that people actually are going back to the shopping malls, to the retailers, the dealerships, to use that as a benchmark to say, hey, here is our expectation in the US. Here's our prediction in the US that how many people would go back, based on some of the benchmarking information that we have.
Okay, so
Right.
so yeah, that's brilliant actually. So what we're looking at then, or what we can assume out of using this data, is that as people are moving again, you can take a look at the rates of their movement, where they're moving to, and therefore, if you are a small business, if you are a automotive retailer, and you wanted to see how much traffic is kind of moving in your direction, and again, if there's a lot of people moving, that means, again, the distance that they're traveling, you can make some inferences using their car. They're using their car, then they're, that's going to require some maintenance, or they may need a new car. You're able to almost provide this kind of rate. I don't know exactly what the metric would be called, but kind of like this velocity rate of how much movement is flowing again, and then businesses can start to decide, hey, you know what, we don't have up just yet because people are slowly moving in back into the area, kind of thing. We don't need a full staff of 100 people. We can kind of pare it down right now to about 50 or 60, and then grow it as they take a look at your data. Am I correct in that?
You're totally right. Yeah. Then
That's
with
brilliant.
that information, essentially, we're providing because there's a lot of supply chain related topics, right? Getting the supply ready to for the demand, but the retailers probably, they don't know how people will react to the reopening the business, whether people
That's
are
brilliant.
being afraid, so they don't want to go out, right? So those type of information, with the real data, and to show to see how people are doing in other countries, or even within the United States, how people react to other stores, right, versus your store. So that information, it's definitely valuable for our customers to use.